So to the start at Glasgow's George Square, and first away Vatanen in the Mark II MCD Escort. At number 2, Michela's Quattro.
Top 10 in the Armour Scottish Rally. He's certainly going to be work cut out. In opposition. I think obviously Hannah.
Behind him, but not planning to stay there for long, Jim McRae.
To beat that car. Well, all the best, and we're looking for the first Scottish victory since Andrew Cowan in 1963.
And the rally got off to a dramatic start. On the first bend of the first stage at Strathclyde Park, Vatanen misjudged the bend, but he made a quick recovery. More serious problems though for Michela. On the same bend he suffered steering failure, a repeat of the problem which put him out of the World Championship Acropolis Rally in Greece the week before. Marshals tried to get him on his way again, then co-driver Arnie Hertz got out to see the trouble for himself. Already a minute was up and the next car was on its way through. It was Jim McRae, and co-driver Ian Grindrod looked round to see what was wrong with their rivals. Blomqvist arrived in the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus, and that was another minute gone. So Michela did the only thing possible. He completed the course in reverse. In the other Opel, Toivonen recorded third fastest time on the stage, while Russell Brooks lifted a wheel to finish 6th. Cumbrian Malcolm Wilson was on his first event of 1982, and cutting corners to the Scottish Championship, Ken Wood. Irishman Bertie Fisher in his distinctive Escort, and Ivor Clark was already pushing his Sunbeam Lotus to equal 4th. Wilson Girvan hadn't quite warmed up to his Chevette, but already throwing his Sunbeam Talbot about, Ronnie McCartney. Local man Bruce Lyle was going well, but about to spin after the flying finish. From the activity of Strathclyde Park, the cars headed south to the tranquility of the Scottish borders, but the peace and quiet was shattered by the arrival of Vatanen. He'd dropped down the field after the first stage and was anxious to make up lost time. McRae had taken the lead, 4 seconds ahead, and he wanted to hold on to it. But Blomqvist was 7 seconds faster through Cardrona Forest and moved into first place. Per Eklund's Toyota was in full cry and finished the stage 5th. And 5 seconds behind him, Russell Brooks. Malcolm Wilson finished Cardrona with a rear puncture but held on to his position. Meanwhile, Michela's early disaster had fired his determination. He was at the bottom of the field but recorded fastest time on the stage. Ken Wood had trouble with oil on his rear brakes, but Ivor Clark was moving well up the field. Wilson Girvan had already had to repair a damaged alternator in his Chevette, and Dougie Reich had been having problems too. Bruce Lyle had recovered from his spin on the first stage, but still had one good headlamp. The world champion set a flying pace and finished the 5th stage at Craik 6 seconds faster than McRae. but he held on too and was still 3 seconds ahead of Blomqvist. Mikkola covered the 8.5-mile stage at an average of more than 60 miles an hour, a full 10 seconds faster than Vatanen. Terry Cavy's Chevette had already inspected the roadside undergrowth at close quarters, while Ken Wood finished the stage without brakes after a rear disc shattered. Bertie Fisher's Escort had oil pressure problems, but Ivor Clark had now moved up to lie 10th overall. Ian Wilson's Avenger kept up with the leaders, while Wilson Gervin and co-driver Bob Wilson were hampered by oil fumes into the car. On to Corrochtry in southwest Scotland, and Vatanen kept his lead as night fell, but there had been some early casualties. Ivor Clark retired his Sunbeam Lotus after blowing a cylinder head gasket on the 11-mile-long Twigley's stage, and many others had minor problems which did nothing to make the event any easier. In a blaze of light, Mikkola arrived, and it wasn't just his lights. Marshals reported his brakes were glowing too. Behind him, Eklund, who dropped to 8th. Glorious sunshine greeted the crews as they arrived at De Villa in Fife, Vatanen still in the lead. McRae had slipped down again to 3rd behind Blomqvist. While McRae's teammate Toivonen had moved up to 4th. And Russell Brooks followed. On to Knock Hill and some spectacular Sunday morning driving. north to Perthshire, and Vatanen had run into his first trouble with a spin, but still held on to his lead, but Mikkola was catching up. McRae still third in spite of a couple of spins. Blomqvist clearly enjoyed the dry, dusty conditions, still lying second. Toivonen was back on form after tracing an engine fault to the distributor. And Russell Brooks was one of 7 drivers to beat the target time on the Ladywell stage. Mikkola broke the front drive shaft on the stage, but he carried on and still beat the target time by 12 seconds. Eklund had dropped down to 10th. While KB with a new rear axle was 8th. Malcolm Wilson had improved to move 2 places ahead in spite of a fire in the car's electrics. And Wilson Girvan seemed pleased with his first ever attempt at an international rally. Ronnie McCartney had so far had a trouble-free drive. Which is more than can be said for Bruce Lyle. Kenwood's Triumph showed no signs that its engine was based on a scrapped block which had done more than 100,000 miles in a 3.5 litre Rover. High above Loch Tummel, the notorious Erechty stage, where the cars took to the air. The remaining crews continued north into Aberdeenshire. And it was there that Vatanen was about to run into disaster. McRae was holding on to 3rd place. And out of the forest came Henry Toivonen in the other Rothmans Opel. slowed by damaged suspension. But Mikola stormed along, now in the top 5 after going right up the field. Malcolm Wilson threw his Escort around the forest to hold on to 7th place. And Blomqvist still going well, but it wasn't to continue. And Ken Wood kept up the pressure, even if he did make 1 or 2 mistakes. And following his wrong example, Bruce Lyle worried about his Chevette staying intact. But disaster struck Ari Vatanen. After leading the whole event, he was forced out when the Escort's prop shaft broke in the middle of Menochte Forest. This put McRae into 2nd place. Also moved up, his earlier engine problems well behind him. Mikola chased hard and proved a real threat to the leadership. Russell Brooks' rear window had disappeared yet again. But Malcolm Wilson had everything under control. Blomqvist took the Talbot into the lead and managed to keep ahead of McRae. And following up the rest of the leaders, Per Eklund. McRae held on, still battling to win his home event, but now he faced a threat from Toivonen. And just over his shoulder was the big Quattro of Mikola, which just raced up the field. Brooks had made a temporary repair to his rear window. And Blomqvist, just ahead of McRae, still held the lead after Vatanen's breakdown. Terry Cabey's Chevette had had a few close encounters, while the small Citroen Visa of John Weatherly lasted the pace. now the final leg through Glenurquhart on the way south to the finish in Glasgow. McRae was now in the lead following the retirement of Blomqvist with a drop in oil pressure, but Mikkola was in second place just a minute behind him and challenged him on every stage. By the morning, McRae's hard fight against the superior traction of the Quattro was over. All night he'd been challenged by Mikkola, and he could see the event slipping away from him. Toivonen was still with him, but Mikkola was about to slip into the lead. By the penultimate stage, the tarmac rest and be thankful, Mikkola had done it. McRae had tried to hold on but couldn't keep back the four-wheel drive Finn. Toivonen followed the Scotsman home. Mikkola knew the fight was over and a steady drive home would give him victory. Brooks had to settle for fourth place, with Malcolm Wilson following him. Eklund came in seventh, giving the new Toyota its first rally result. And Cabey was just ahead, overcoming his earlier problems. As the rest of the 39 cars still left in the event made their way south, McRae was left to follow Mikkola to the finish. It couldn't have been closer, separated by less than 30 seconds. In Glasgow, the crowds had already gathered to see the winner. Behind a police escort, Mikkola was piped in, leading the two Rothmans Opels. It had been an incredible drive. Just 4 days before, on the very first stage, Mikkola had been last. 49 special stages later, he was first.